These are the corrections for the 10th grade Quarter 1 exam, starting off with Passage 1, The Sapphires of Lily McGill. So, Paragraph 1. I arrived at the railway station near dawn and found it filled with travelers. After purchasing my fare, I settled upon a bench and opened my book, a parting gift from a friend. I had not wanted to leave my home in the city, and thought with trepidation of the new life awaiting me as a schoolteacher in a remote village. Within minutes, however, I was lost in the adventures of the Count of Monte Cristo. The novel by Mr. Dumas had been published a few years earlier, and a more thrilling tale I had never encountered. So right there's a couple of things that I'm already noticing in the passage. So starting off, we know that she is a traveler, right? She's at a railway station, that she likes to read. She's reading a book, The Count of Monte Cristo. And we also know that she had not wanted to leave her home in the city and thought with trepidation. So right there, that sounds like that is probably a conflict, because this is the first negative thing that has appeared so far. She had not wanted to leave her home. She thought with trepidation of the new life awaiting her as a schoolteacher. Now, you probably don't know what the word trepidation means, but consider the context. She's moving to a new place. She's not happy about it. She doesn't know what it's going to be like. Generally, when you're approaching a brand new situation, it's reasonable for you to feel fear, and trepidation is basically a fancy word for fear. So she's afraid about what lies ahead because she's unsure. She doesn't know what's going to happen. But then she gets lost in her book that she's reading. So moving on to paragraph 2, I had finished the first chapter when bits of a whispered conversation drifted to my ears. Hundreds of sapphires, highest quality. I carry them upon my person. I was astounded, and it seemed as if I'd been transported from Scotland right into the romantic world of the Count himself. So this is making that connection with the book that she's reading, The Count of Monte Cristo. This, a person carrying sapphires on them, is the type of thing that might happen in a novel or a book. It seems unreal. Paragraph 3. A man of about 35, clad in a nondescript cloak, sat a few feet away with a young girl, likely his daughter, dozing against his shoulder. He spoke in low tones to another man, who then shook his hand, wished him farewell, and disappeared into the crowd. Paragraph 4. My mind buzzed with curiosity, and I wondered if the man were a pirate of some sort. So we have that because that conversation that he just had about sapphires, now she thinks maybe he's a pirate, right? Her mind is in this very imaginative place based on the adventure story that she was reading. When he wrapped his scarf gently around the sleeping child, I dismissed the notion, convinced that so tender a person could not be a criminal. Was he a lord in disguise, then, on a special mission for the crown? So basically, she's sitting there on this train just trying to come up with these different explanations for the sapphires that he could have been carrying with him, that she had heard him discussing when she was eavesdropping on his conversation. Paragraph 5. The conductor sounded the boarding call, and the pair I had been observing followed close behind me. Soon we were settled in the same train compartment. The girl, awake now, introduced herself as Molly, and with that frankness I always admire in children, produced a box of dominoes and asked if I should like to play. Now, that word frankness right there, that might be another word you might not recognize. But let's look at the context. It's frankness that she always admires in children. So this is a characteristic unique to children, or mainly very frequently observed in children, rather. Maybe not unique to them, but frequently observed in children. And it is demonstrated by the way that she introduces herself and she produces a game and invites her to play. So in this case, frankness is kind of like an open honesty. So the child's being very open by just coming right over and introducing herself and asking the teacher if she wants to play a game with her. We commenced a series of games, and I informed her that I would soon be teaching children of about her age. We chatted amiably about my new position as I convinced myself to forget my worries. I wondered still about her father's sapphires, but considered it impertinent to ask. That word impertinent, another one you might not recognize, but from the context, she's wondering about the sapphires, but she doesn't want to ask. Well, why wouldn't you ask a question about that? Probably because it would be rude. So being impertinent probably has something to do with being rude or too forward. Paragraph 6. We arrived at my destination, an outpost of a few houses surrounded by pastures. As I gathered up my belongings, the gentleman rose and thanked me for my kindness to Molly. He handed me an envelope from his pocket, explaining, "I call these sapphires. Follow the instructions, and perhaps they will bring you luck in your new home." I had no time to question him, for the train did not linger long at that remote depot. So now she's been given some of these sapphires, but the fact that he says, "I call these sapphires," suggests that maybe they're not literal sapphires. Paragraph 7. When I peeked inside the envelope, I did not know whether to be disappointed or amused at the sight of the tiny seeds. Sapphires indeed. Perhaps the gentleman was simply teasing me for sport, but I smiled in spite of myself. I tucked the sapphires into my bag, where they were promptly forgotten amid the demands of my new position. Now, we see right there that sapphires is placed in quotation marks. That's to indicate that they're not literally sapphires, and quotation marks can be used for a couple of different things in a text. They can be used to indicate a new word that's being defined. They can be used to indicate literal dialogue, but they can also be used to indicate like doubt or uncertainty, or that something isn't really that. So in this case, the quotation marks around the sapphires are saying, yeah, they're not really sapphires. So it kind of lets you know that it's not being literal in this particular usage. Where they were promptly forgotten amid the demands of my new position. Remember, she was going to this remote town to become a schoolteacher. Paragraph 8. Though the children were pleasant enough, and right there that word though indicates that there's going to be a but, even though the children were pleasant enough, that winter proved the most trying of my life. And here we're back to the conflict again. So the main conflict, all of the negativity of this story, seems to be wrapped up in the fact that she's uncertain about moving, in the fact that she's struggling with moving. I missed my friends and the entertainments, musical concerts, dances, teas I had enjoyed in the city. When spring finally came, I was considering a search for a position elsewhere when my eye fell upon my old friend, the Count of Monte Cristo, on my bookshelf. The novel reminded me of the gentleman on the train and his mysterious sapphires. So here she's reached a point where she needs to make a decision or a change. She doesn't feel like her life is currently working out for her because she has no friends, she's lonely, but then she remembers the sapphires and she takes another look at those seeds. Paragraph 9. The next day, I organized my pupils into a planting committee, and we embedded the seeds in the soil according to the instructions. The school year ended, and I departed to pass the summer in Edinburgh, my home city. When I returned, a crowd of parents and children surrounded me when I descended from the train. The littlest one seized my hand, shouting, "Come see the sapphires!" Sure enough, the grasses around the schoolhouse were covered in hundreds of dazzling sapphire-colored flowers, bobbing in the breeze. Those flowers must have encouraged the villagers to blossom too, as people who had hardly spoken to me now stopped to chat and invite me to dinner. Though we did not have the resources of a great city, there was none the less music, friendly conviviality, and much laughter. Slowly I came to regard the village as home. So right here we see, once she planted these flowers and they blossomed, all of the people warmed up to her, they started being friendly to her, so the conflict of the story has essentially been resolved. She's found herself a place once she started getting to know people after that initial opening gesture. Now, this word here, conviviality, is another one you might not recognize, but if you use the context that it's being used in, music, friendly conviviality, much laughter, you can probably figure out that conviviality probably has something to do with maybe cheerfulness or friendship, something along those lines. It's going to fit in with the rest of the surrounding words. Paragraph 11. Years later, I received a package containing a beautifully illustrated volume titled Flowering Plants of the World. A note assured me that it was authored by none other than the gentleman from the train, now a distinguished botanist with watercolors by his daughter Molly. At a place bookmarked by a slip of paper, I found a page devoted to Browellia speciosa, sapphire flowers. Here, however, they will always be known as the sapphires of Lily McGill. So we have that lovely conclusion where she hears back from the gentleman again. She gets the book. He's a successful botanist. But the focus of this story isn't actually on the sapphires. Even though it's titled The Sapphires of Lily McGill, the focus of this story really seems to be on her journey into a new place and how she comes to regard that place as her new home, how she makes friends and finally becomes comfortable in this new place. Question 1 reads, Part A, what is the theme of The Sapphires of Lily McGill? So theme, first of all, is a term that you definitely need to understand. It's almost certainly going to be on the FSA. So if you're not familiar, theme is basically literary main idea, the major point that was conveyed by the events of the story. And unlike a nonfiction text, it will very rarely be directly stated in a story. You usually have to consider what has happened in the story and come to a conclusion about what you think kind of like the life lesson is. Now, some teachers misteach this, where they'll say theme is something like love or hate, but a theme is a main idea. It has to be a point about something. So it can be a point about love. It can be a point about hate. Hatred harms you in the end. Love conquers all. But it has to be an actual statement of a point, not just a single word. So if you've ever been mistaught about theme, just understand it must have an actual point because it is the literary equivalent of main idea. So let's go ahead and look at each of the choices. So answer A here is correct. Changes in life cause unnecessary anticipation because it all works out in the end. So in this particular case, we know that the story was focused on changes in life because Lily McGill was trepidatious about moving to a new place. She was worried about it. It's unnecessary anticipation because she spent a great deal of time worrying when really the moment people started reaching out to her, she was just fine. So she didn't need to be worrying. All she needed to do was go there and be herself. And everything worked out. And it did all work out in the end. So answer choice A there is correct. Answer choice B, when life changes, cautious and curious behavior should always be utilized. Well, the first thing that I find troubling about this answer is should always. Anytime you see the word always, you want to be very cautious of absolutes like that. There are very few things in life that are absolute. The other reason you want to be cautious of this answer is that nothing in here indicates that Lily should have been cautious. She didn't get into any trouble because she wasn't cautious. So there's nothing in here teaching her that she needs to be more cautious. If anything, it was when she finally opened up and shared those flowers with the town that she found a place for herself. So if anything, she needed to be less cautious. So I would say that's the opposite of the actual answer. And just be careful of those absolutes as well. Be very cautious of them. Answer choice C, changes in life cause unnecessary friendships because people sense fear. Well, first of all, I don't know that any friendship is unnecessary, and I certainly don't think that was the point of this story, considering the story has her only become happy once she actually makes friends. So I would say that the friendships were actually deeply necessary, and it wasn't that people sensed fear. It wasn't because they sensed fear that they became friends with her. It's because she shared these flowers with them and they wanted to get to know her more. So this answer is certainly not true. Answer choice D, when life changes. Okay, so I understand why people might have chosen this because this story was focused on the idea of Lily McGill's life changing. So the initial part of this answer does seem to make sense. Let's look at the rest. Gifts from friends are necessary to feel safe and secure. Well, I understand why you would choose this answer, but there's a couple of problems with it. First of all, are necessary. That's kind of another absolute, like you have to have a gift from a friend to feel safe and secure. I'm not sure that that is what this story was actually getting at, because it wasn't the seeds themselves that made her feel safe and secure. It is the seeds that got people to start to befriend her, but it's not it wasn't because she got a gift from a friend. It was because she kind of opened up, I think, to the people around her, and they were interested by her as a result of it. And also characterizing it as a gift from a friend, whether he was really a good friend of hers or just a passing acquaintance, I might take issue with that phrasing as well. So I understand why you'd be tempted to choose this answer. I just don't think it's quite as good as the initial answer, that she didn't need to worry so much because things did work themselves out in the end. But I understand why you would want to choose D, because it was a gift that helped her find a place there. But it wasn't just the presence of the seeds themselves that made her feel safe and secure. Question 2 reads, Part B, which sentence from The Sapphires of Lily McGill develops the theme? Now, this question was very closely connected to the previous one. So if you didn't answer number 1 correctly, that changes in life cause unnecessary anticipation because it all works out in the end, you'd have a very difficult time choosing the correct evidence to back that up, because they gave a piece of evidence basically for each potential theme that could conceivably back it up. So this is a very difficult question to get correct if you got number 1 wrong. So the answer to number 1 is that changes in life cause unnecessary anticipation because it all works out in the end. So we're looking for evidence that her fear was unnecessary because everything worked out. So the correct answer here is slowly I came to regard the village as home. This is the answer that actually indicates the end of the conflict being her uncertainty about a new place, her not having any friends there, the resolution being that she finds a home there and that people start to welcome her. So this is the evidence that everything did work out in the end, which was the correct answer to number 1. Now, answer choice A, my mind buzzed with curiosity. I wondered if the man were a pirate of some sort. So this does have something about curiosity, which would match up with the answer about curious behavior. Answer choice B, we chatted amiably about my new position as I convinced myself to forget my worries. So she's convincing herself to forget her worries, but that doesn't really prove that there's an unnecessary friendship because people have sensed fear or anything like that. And just the fact that she forgot her worries doesn't mean that it was unnecessary fear, right? What made it unnecessary was the fact that everything worked out in the end. So answer choice B isn't really supporting evidence that it will all work out in the end. Answer choice C, the novel reminded me of the gentleman on the train and his mysterious sapphires. Now, this is a very specific detail from the story, so I understand why you'd want to choose it, right? This is something that actually happened. But the conflict was never about the sapphires. The conflict was never about the book. So the evidence about the theme being developed, it was never about that. Those seeds were just the tool that helped her make the place a home. The real resolution of the conflict was that she was able to make that place a home. So while this detail was involved in the resolution, it's not actually the resolution itself. Which is answer choice D, that she did come to find the place to be a home. Question 3 reads, which sentence from The Sapphires of Lily McGill illustrates how the author uses language to evoke the time period in which the passage is set? So answer choice B is correct here. We arrived at my destination, an outpost of a few houses surrounded by pastures. So right there, that use of outpost is something that you don't really hear said anymore. And that's archaic language that's not really used anymore. So it does evoke a time period in which the passage is set. It suggests that this occurred sometime in the past when there were outposts, areas kind of removed from civilization. Now we would just say, like a rural town. We wouldn't really call it an outpost, though. So it's that archaic language that makes it clear what time period this is from. Answer choice A, I had finished the first chapter when bits of a whispered conversation drifted to my ears. Well, nothing about that evokes a particular time period. I mean, people still read books today. People still talk about conversation drifting, right? That's not an uncommon phrasing or an uncommon usage. It's still used today. So that answer does not evoke a particular time period. Answer choice C. I missed my friends and the entertainments, musical concerts, dances, and teas I had enjoyed in the city. Well, these again are all things that still happen today. Concerts, dances, going to tea, there's still tea houses in the modern day. So this is something that still applies. There is nothing about it that has changed, right? We still all enjoy going out and spending time with our friends. Answer choice D. The next day I organized my pupils into a planting committee and we embedded the seeds in the soil according to the instructions. You might have chosen this if you thought embedded was like an unusual word or something that you didn't recognize, or pupils for students, but those words are still used in the modern language, and there's nothing unusual about a class of young students planting some seeds. I still remember planting bean seeds in like second grade or whatever. So these again are still things that are happening in the modern day. So the only reference in these 4 lines that isn't modern is that reference to an outpost. That's something that should stand out to you as unusual and not from this time period. Question 4 reads, read the following sentence. Sure enough, the grasses around the schoolhouse were covered in hundreds of dazzling sapphire-colored flowers bobbing in the breeze. Which type of figurative language did the author use, and what was its intended purpose? So right here, the first step is you have to be able to correctly identify the literary device. Answer choice A, the author used personification to make the description of the flowers more vivid, providing an emotional connection to the beauty of the sapphires. So is there personification? Does it make the flowers more vivid? Let's look at it. It's talking about it was covered in hundreds of dazzling sapphire-colored flowers bobbing in the breeze. Well, bobbing is kind of like moving your head up and down. So it's providing this human characteristic of deliberate movement of the head, or in this case, the flower head. So it is personification, and the movement of the flowers in the breeze is part of what makes them seem particularly beautiful. So the personification does make the flowers more vivid, and it does make you really feel the beauty of the sapphire flowers. Answer choice B. The author used an allusion in reference to the schoolhouse, providing a historical connection to the time period in which the story is set. Here's the problem. An allusion is a specific reference to something particularly famous. So just a random schoolhouse is not an allusion. An allusion would be one particular schoolhouse, like the Salem, Massachusetts schoolhouse or something along those lines. It's not an allusion because it's not a particular schoolhouse that's famous or well-known being referenced. So it is not an allusion, but I understand why you might think that, because it does refer to a schoolhouse. It's just not referring to a famous or well-known schoolhouse. And there's no particular historical connection to that particular schoolhouse. So answer choice B is not correct. Answer choice C, the author used a parallel structure. Well, first of all, this requires you to know what parallel structure is. Parallel, first of all, you guys probably know from math, right? Lines that kind of line up side by side the same way like that. So parallel structure in grammar is where elements in the sentence are the same grammatically. So like if you have a list, I like running, jumping, and skipping. All of those things that you like are INGs, running, jumping, skipping. You wouldn't say, I like to run, to jump, and skipping. It doesn't work, and your ear should realize how wrong that sounds. It's because the grammar doesn't match up. The different elements in the sentence don't match grammatically. So most sentences that are grammatical do have some element of parallel structure. But is there a particular parallelism that organizes the idea of the flowers, providing a satisfying rhythm, making it easier to understand? Hundreds of dazzling sapphire-colored flowers bobbing in the breeze. I'm not noticing anything stand out to me. Like, there's not a list with the same kind of structure throughout. So while there could be parallel elements, nothing's standing out to me as a deliberate strategy that's helping organize the flowers. So answer choice C is not correct. Answer choice D, the author used irony. Now, irony, another device you might not be familiar with, is when something is the opposite of what you would expect. And there's a couple different types. Verbal, right? Sarcasm. You say one thing, mean another. Dramatic, okay, where the character doesn't know something but the audience does, and the audience realizes that they're like making a mistake based on knowledge that the character doesn't have. Or situational irony, where something just is the opposite of what you would expect, like in a life situation. For example, the fire department burning down. You would never expect a fire department to burn down, right? It's full of firefighters. Like, logically, they should be able to put out a fire at their own fire department. So that is something that would have a great deal of situational irony if a fire department burned down, because they are the ones intended to put out fires, not to be the victims of the fire themselves. So there's no irony here. There's nothing that's the opposite of what is actually intended or communicated. There's not a difference between what is being said and what's expected. Like, flowers are pretty. That's a normal expectation that people have. There's nothing unexpected about flowers being pretty and moving in the breeze. These are all things that, like, we expect from the world around us. Question 5 reads, how does the interaction between Lily and the man on the train aid in the development of the theme? So the theme, again, this is another question where if you didn't answer number 1 correctly, you'd have a difficult time with this. So the theme, the point of the story was, once you make friends, you'll find a new home. Like, everything will be okay in the end. So how does the interaction between Lily and the man help develop this theme of eventually fitting in and everything being okay? Well, the man provided Lily with a gift, which is what helped Lily make her new location a home. If the theme is eventually being able to make a new home and fit in, the fact that she had that gift which helped her fit in is a detail that helped generate that theme. So answer choice D is correct here, because that fits with the specific theme we had previously discussed in number 1. Answer choice A, the man provided Lily with a distraction from her book as she built a friendship with his daughter. Well, the friendship with his daughter isn't the point, because the friendship with his daughter isn't what helped her make a new home there, right? She only ever heard from them one more time when she got a book sent to her. So while this story is focused on friendship helping make a new place a home, that particular friendship isn't the one that does it. So answer choice A is not what develops that theme of eventually fitting in her new home. Answer choice B, though the interaction was insignificant at the time, Lily ended up receiving a published book from the man. The published book from the man has no connection whatsoever to the theme being that, hey, everything was okay in the end and she made this place a home. Like, if she still didn't have friends in the new place and she just got the book, she still would have been completely and utterly unhappy. So while this is a nice concluding detail that kind of ties up a loose end, what happened to the man and the daughter? It doesn't actually have anything to do with the development of the theme, of the idea that, making friends and, is something that'll help you make a place a home. Answer choice C, though at first Lily was afraid of the man, she ended up appreciating his love for botany. Well, she did end up appreciating his love for botany, that's true. And she was initially afraid of the man, that's also true. This is a true statement. However, this true statement has nothing to do with the development of the theme that everything will be okay in the end, and that you can make a new place a home. All right, appreciating his love for botany doesn't really make the place a new home. It wasn't the fact that she liked his flowers that made it a home. It's the fact that she finally had other people reach out to her once they appreciated her and had the chance to really start to get to know her as a person. Question number 6 reads, read the following excerpt from the Sapphires of Lily McGill. He spoke in low tones to another man, who then shook his hand, wished him farewell, and disappeared into the crowd. Why did the author choose to include this excerpt at the beginning of the story? So why include this particular detail? Well, answer choice B is correct here. To characterize the man on the train as mysterious in order to maintain the reader's curiosity regarding his role in the story. The fact that there is a mysterious meeting with another man, she never finds out who the other man is, he disappears into the crowd. These are mysterious sounding things. She thinks there's sapphires involved, so she probably thinks there's some kind of surreptitious deal going on, something kind of on the down low happening. So this is something that would keep the man mysterious, and it would maintain the reader's curiosity regarding his role in the story. Even though ultimately the story isn't really about the man, it gets the audience interested in a story that otherwise might be a little boring. Like, hey, she moved to a new place, she made friends, she was happy. That's really a very boring kind of story if you don't have some kind of element of excitement. So having that man there as this mysterious, maybe he's a pirate, maybe there's sapphires, adds this element of interest to the story that might not otherwise be there, even though it's not the point of the story. It's an attention-grabbing device. Answer choice A, to create a sense of tension. So it does add more tension, and I understand why you might be tempted to choose answer choice A, because it does create a sense of tension. However, regarding the impending conflict between Lily and the man on the train, there's never actually a conflict, so there's certainly not an impending conflict between them. So it does create tension, but there isn't an impending conflict between them because the conflict never materializes. So this, in retrospect, understanding what happened in this story, we know that this is not the correct answer. But if you had only just read the beginning of the story, you could very well be tempted to choose this answer. Answer choice C, to compare the man on the train to the Count of Monte Cristo. So she does make a comparison between the man on the train and the Count of Monte Cristo, but not in that particular line, right? There's no mention of the Count of Monte Cristo in this particular line, and nothing about that is particularly reminiscent of the story other than, like, it's kind of mysterious and there's a guy who's kind of doing questionable things and who's wealthy. So this particular line is not an explicit comparison to Count of Monte Cristo, and it isn't emphasizing the similarities of the impact that they have on Lily, right? The Count of Monte Cristo, that story, isn't what really has an impact on Lily in this story. The man's gift does have a big impact on her, but the book, The Count of Monte Cristo, it isn't what really has the impact on her. It's the fact that she makes the new place a home that has an impact on her. So answer choice C, while tempting, and while several of these details are present in the text, is not the answer. Answer choice D, to use imagery. Well, there is some imagery, right? Shaking hand, disappearing into the crowd, there is imagery, in order for the reader to visualize a secret transaction between criminals and its impact on Lily's experience on the train. So here's the thing. We are visualizing a secretive transaction, but they're not actually criminals. And the point isn't really her experience on the train. The point is to get our attention and make us interested in the story, not the impact that it ends up having on Lily, because this experience of her seeing them shaking hands actually isn't what really has an impact on Lily. So I understand why you'd be tempted to choose this answer, but it's not actually correct. Reads, what effect did the author use to create a sense of surprise in paragraph 11? So first of all, we need to go ahead and look at paragraph 11. We're trying to identify what created a sense of surprise. So let's go ahead and scroll up to 11. Years later, I received a package containing a beautifully illustrated volume titled Flowering Plants of the World. A note assured me it was authored by none other than the gentleman from the train, now a distinguished botanist, with watercolors by his daughter Molly. At a place bookmarked by a slip of paper, I found a page devoted to Browallia speciosa, sapphire flowers. So what is surprising about this? Well, the fact that she got a book from this person after all these years, that seems surprising. The fact that the flowers were actually called sapphires, that's another detail that might be surprising. So let's go ahead and look at the answer choices for that paragraph. Answer choice D is correct. The author used a flash forward which surprised the reader that Lily and the man on the train kept in touch. Well, it is a flash forward because it's telling you many years later she received this book from the man. So it is flashing forward to years in the future when he's now a renowned botanist and the daughter has grown up enough to be able to illustrate a book. And this does surprise the reader that Lily and the man on the train kept in touch because this was a very chance encounter that she just happened to play with the child that day on the train. He just happened to give her a packet of seeds. That packet of seeds just happened to be what made her feel at home in her new home. So this was a lot of coincidences. Like, did they even exchange contact information? How did the man find her again? So that is a detail that I found surprising. And it is conducted through that flash forward where it jumps forward in time, which even if you've never seen that as a literary technique before, right, just the name itself is pretty self-explanatory. Now, looking at the other answers, answer choice A, the author used foreshadowing in order to help the reader understand how surprised Lily was to receive a book in the future. First of all, we don't know how surprised Lily was because it doesn't tell us how surprised Lily was. We know that we are surprised, but we don't know that she was surprised. It's also not foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a hint of what is going to come in the future, not the author explicitly telling us what is going to happen in the future. So foreshadowing, while a more common literary device, is not actually the correct one here. Answer choice B, the author used a flashback, which surprised the reader that Lily was such a good gardener before she received the book. Well, it's definitely not a flashback because it's describing something happening years in the future after the child has had a chance to grow up. So it's not a flashback, which is going backwards in time. It's a flash forward, going forwards in time. Answer choice C, the author used the technical term for sapphire flowers. Well, that's an accurate statement. And Lily's refusal to call them anything but sapphires of Lily McGill was surprising. Well, she's not the one calling them that. It's the people of the town calling them that. And it doesn't tell us that she's refusing to call them anything but that. It's just suggesting that they were known as her sapphires, probably because that's what the townspeople associated them with. So it's not specifically that she's refusing to call them anything else that is surprising here. Passage 2 is an excerpt. That means it's a tiny section taken out of a larger piece. So it's an excerpt from Senator Lodge's speech against the League of Nations. So right away we know what stance this speech is taking. Now, this was a passage that was particularly rough for a lot of students. So I think part of the difficulty is that we have two different speeches on the same topic but taking opposing sides. And that's where the questions are going to be targeted at. So let's go ahead and look at this speech first and its questions before we move on to the speech in favor of the League of Nations. So it starts off by giving you some context in italics here. It's giving you background information that's important for you to understand in order to understand what's going on. So it tells you, after the conclusion of World War I, 44 nations formed the League of Nations, an association of nations intended to secure the peace and prevent another world war. Henry Cabot Lodge, a United States senator, delivered this speech on August 12, 1919. In it, he argued against American involvement in the League of Nations. So we're told what the League of Nations is intended to do, that it's intended to secure the peace and prevent another world war, and he's arguing against our involvement in this. Well, it sounds like a great thing. Preventing another world war, isn't that a good thing? So let's see why he wants to argue against it and how he persuades us of his perspective, of his point of view. So, paragraph 1. Mr. President, the independence of the United States is not only more precious to ourselves, but to the world than any single possession. Look at the United States today. We have made mistakes in the past. We have had shortcomings. We shall make mistakes in the future and fall short of our own best hopes. But, nonetheless, is there any country today on the face of the earth which can compare with this in ordered liberty, in peace, and in the largest freedom? So right there, he starts by establishing some concessions that he's making to the other side, and he starts to provide his own counterclaim. We're not sure to what end, though. It's the beginning of his argument. He's just developing his perspective. So he says that the independence of the United States is the most precious thing, more than anything else, any other possession in the world, and that it doesn't just benefit the United States, but it also benefits the entire world that the United States remain independent. So his argument is probably going to have something to do with us maintaining our independence, considering this is something supposedly so precious to ourselves and to the world. Look at us today. We have made mistakes. So what some people might say is, well, look what we've done in the past. Clearly, it's not all it's cracked up to be. But he's saying, yes, we have made mistakes. However, but nonetheless, is there any country today on the face of the earth which can compare in these traits that we have as a country, right? This is our strength. And it's implying that this strength is a result of our independence, that our independence as a country is necessary for us to maintain these strengths that make us stand out above the other countries. So we can start to see where he's going in his argument, even if he hasn't explicitly gone there yet. Paragraph 3. Contrast the United States with any country on the face of the earth today, and ask yourself whether the situation of the United States is not the best to be found. I will go as far as anyone in world service, but the first step in world service is the maintenance of the United States. So he starts by saying, look, we're the best. We're the best because we're the way we are. Why do we want to change what's making us the best? He then addresses the counterclaim. I will go as far as anyone in world service. Yes, the rest of the world matters, but for us to help the rest of the world, we need to maintain ourselves first. We need to worry about ourselves before we can worry about the rest of the world. Paragraph 4. You may call me selfish if you will. Another counterclaim he's addressing. Yes, people might think I'm selfish, conservative or reactionary, or use any other harsh adjective you see fit to apply. So right there, he's casting some shade by describing them as harsh, something that is typically very negative connotation. You're being too harsh if you use these words to describe me, but you can do it if you want. He's establishing that he doesn't really agree with the other side, but he's acknowledging that they have the right to make their own mistakes. That's some really clever shade right there being thrown. But an American I was born, an American I have remained all my life. I can never be anything else but an American, and I must think of the United States first. So now he's couching his argument in terms of patriotism. I am an American. Because I am an American, I need to look out for our country. Are you an American? Is kind of the implied criticism. If you're in favor of the League of Nations, you must not be American enough to care about our country. So it's really kind of subtle. He hasn't outright accused them of not being patriotic, but he's implying it. I am being a patriot by holding this stance. Are you? Is kind of what's going on in this paragraph. And when I think of the United States first in an arrangement like this, I am thinking of what is best for the world, for if the United States fails, the best hopes of mankind fail with it. So he's saying the reason this is the right course of action, despite not going along with the League of Nations, is that for the United States to continue helping the world, we need to look out for ourselves first. We need to worry about us, not the League of Nations. Paragraph 5. I have never had but one allegiance. I cannot divide it now. I have never had more than just my allegiance to the U.S. I have always been focused on the U.S. I cannot divide my allegiance to the United States now. I will not distract my focus from my great country to this League of Nations thing, is kind of what's being implied here. I have loved but one flag, and I cannot share that devotion and give affection to the mongrel banner invented for a league. So right here, he starts to really insult the other side. He's like, look, I'm true to the American flag, not that mongrel, that mutt of a dog flag of these combined countries in this league. I'm not going to support that flag over my flag, the only true flag, right? The United States flag is kind of what he is saying here. So we have that mongrel banner is very insulting, very negative connotations if you're calling something a mongrel, like a mutt. Very negative connotations that he's developing towards the other side of the league. Internationalism, illustrated by the Bolshevik and the men to whom all countries are alike, provided they can make money out of them, is to me repulsive. So internationalism is to me repulsive. And he gives you an illusion illustrated by the Bolshevik and by the men to whom all countries are alike. So here we have an allusion to something from history, probably not a positive thing, considering he's using it as evidence that this internationalism of the League is something repulsive. Very strongly negative language now. So he's gone from being kind of making concessions to, yeah, you have the right to criticize me in that way, I guess, to now outright calling the other side repulsive and a mongrel banner. Very harsh language being used now. Paragraph 6, national I must remain, right? Loyal to the United States, not this League of Nations. National I must remain, and in that way I, like all other Americans, can render the amplest service to the world. I can render the best service to the world by remaining loyal to the United States, because again, the United States is what makes the world go round in his perspective. The United States is the world's best hope, and he emphasizes that idea again of the United States being this guiding light for the world that's necessary. So it's important that we be selfish, because by being selfish, that's how we really help others, is by being selfish, according to his argument. But if you fetter her, and fetter here, it gives you a little notation telling you that there's a definition that you can look at further down in the passage. So let's go ahead and scroll down and see if it has that definition of fetter for you. Fetter, confine or restrain. And it also tells you about the Bolshevik, a member of the Communist Party, a political party in Russia, which traditionally Americans have been very anti-communist, the Cold War, all of that. So it's giving us some added context for the passage to help us make sense of things. So pay attention for those little numbers, because they indicate that there's a footnote at the bottom that you can go look at for added information. So to fetter is to confine or restrain, to keep something chained up. If you chain up America in the interests and quarrels of other nations, if you fangle her in the intrigues of Europe, you will destroy her power for good and endanger her very existence. So if you join the League of Nations, you are destroying America's power and endangering America's existence, you traitor, is kind of what's being implied. Leave her to march freely through the centuries to come as in the years that have gone. Let America continue doing what she has been doing, because that is what makes her great. If you stop her, if you chain her, you destroy her, and you destroy her power to help the world, is the argument he is advancing. Paragraph 7. Ideals have been thrust upon us as an argument for the League until the healthy mind which rejects can't revolt from them. So he's presenting it as though these ideas for the League have been thrust upon us. It's not a choice. We're not agreeing to this. We're being forced. Until the healthy mind which rejects can't revolt from them. We can't even escape these revolting ideas. They're being forced on us. Our ideals confined to this deformed experiment upon a noble purpose, tainted as it is with bargains and tied to a peace treaty which might have been disposed of long ago, to the great benefit of the world if it had not been compelled to carry this rider on its back. So he's asking, is this really as good as they are presenting it to be? He's questioning the validity of what's being forced upon America in this moment. Paragraph 8. No doubt many excellent and patriotic people see a coming fulfillment of noble ideals in the words League for Peace. Yes, their message is couched in terms that people would find pleasant, right? Who can argue against the idea of peace? We all respect and share these aspirations and desires, but, and anytime you see that transition, that but, nevertheless, however, understand he's about to flip the argument. So he acknowledges, he makes that concession that yes, League for Peace sounds like a great idea. Yes, we all want peace. However, some of us see no hope, but rather defeat for them in this murky covenant. Specifically, the covenant, the agreement being discussed, is the League of Nations. So he's saying, yes, Peace is a noble idea, but I don't see peace as an effect of what we are discussing here. For we too have our ideals, even if we differ from those who have tried to establish a monopoly of idealism. So there, a monopoly, another phrase that has strong negative connotations, one company being the only one in charge. He's describing their ideas as a monopoly of idealism. You feel as though you're the only ones who can be in the right morally. Well, you're wrong. Don't act like you have this monopoly on being idealistic, or on, being hopeful about what is going to happen and trying to do what's right and what's best. Paragraph 9, our first ideal is our country. So he's redefining how he is being idealistic. And we see her in the future as in the past, giving service to all her people and to the world. Our ideal of the future is that she should continue to render that service of her own free will. Keep America free so she can continue doing what she does best. She has great problems of her own to solve, very grim and perilous problems, and a right solution, if we can attain to it, would largely benefit mankind. America has her own problems to solve. Don't make her worry about the other countries until she's solved her own, and by letting her solve her own problems, it would benefit mankind. We would have our country strong to resist a peril from the West, as she has flung back the German menace from the East. So who is off in the West? Well, considering it's talking about the Communist Party in Russia, that might have something to do, right? The threat of communism from the West might be what they are talking about here, and it's alluding to the past where they just dealt with the Nazis, the German menace from the East. So they're going from having dealt with the Nazis to being worried about the communists, is kind of the historical shift that's being alluded to here. We would not have our politics distracted and embittered by the dissensions of other lands. So he thinks that being part of this league would lead to them being distracted and embittered, both very strongly negative things. We would not have our country's vigor, our country's strength exhausted, or her moral force abated by everlasting meddling and muddling in every quarrel, great and small, which afflicts the world. So he thinks that the League of Nations is going to focus the United States on all of the small conflicts that it shouldn't be worried about, and that this will cost it its strength and its freedom and its ability to do good in the world. Paragraph 11, our ideal is to make her ever stronger and better and finer, because in that way alone, as we believe, can she be of greatest service to the world's peace and to the welfare of mankind. So he's saying, look, my argument is America needs to be selfish and stay out of this league, because America does all this great stuff, and if we're not selfish, if we don't take care of ourselves first, how are we supposed to save the rest of the world? You need to let us be selfish now, is basically what this argument seems to come down to. Question 8 reads, which quotation from Senator Lodge's speech against the League of Nations best supports the central idea of the text? So right there, you need to first and foremost understand what the central idea of the text is. Honestly, if you didn't already listen to the passage recording for passage 2, you need to go back and do so, because once you hear me explain it throughout the entirety of the passage, it should be entirely clear to you what the main idea, the central idea of the text is. So the central idea here is that the United States needs to be selfish in order to help others. By remaining independent of the League of Nations, the United States will be most effectively able to help the larger world. So that's the main idea that was conveyed throughout the passage. Answer choice B is correct here, because it says, I must think of the United States first. So there we have that element of selfishness. The United States is my first loyalty and needs to remain my first loyalty, because by keeping the United States first, I am thinking of what is best for the world. The United States can only help the rest of the world if the United States remains itself and takes care of itself. So it's an argument in favor of selfishness, claiming that this selfishness is what is necessary to help the world. And this quote does support that main idea that keeps coming through. Every time he keeps repeating things like America first, America's flag first, I've never divided my loyalty, I'm not going to start dividing my loyalty now. He emphasizes it again and again and again throughout the passage. So again, go back to that passage, reading where I explain paragraph by paragraph, if you don't understand how that's the main idea. Answer choice A, we shall make mistakes in the future and fall short of our own best hopes. This is a concession that he's making to the other side. It is not his main point. His point is not that America makes mistakes and falls short. His point is that America can best help others by remaining America, by remaining itself, and by taking care of itself. Answer choice C, you may call me selfish if you will, conservative or reactionary, or use any other harsh adjective you see fit to apply. This is another concession he makes to the other side, but it is not his actual argument. Answer choice D, no doubt many excellent and patriotic people see a coming fulfillment of noble ideas in the World's League for Peace. This is definitely not the main idea because it tells us right in the title that he's arguing against the League of Nations, and this is something that would actually support the League of Nations. No doubt many excellent and patriotic people see noble ideals in the World's League for Peace. But again, that's him leading up to a rebuttal where he's about to tear it back down. But there are other ways to be idealistic too. So the only one that actually matches his main idea of keeping America first, of being selfish in order to help others better, is answer choice B. Question 9 reads, which of the following statements best explains why the United States should maintain its independence from the League of Nations? So again, this is looking for evidence of his primary argument, that the United States should remain independent. Answer choice D is correct. It is more important to the world that the United States is strong on its own so that it can be of service to the rest of the world. This does support this idea that it should maintain independence because it's saying that it needs to remain strong so that it can be of service. If it doesn't become or stay strong, it can't be of service. Answer choice A, it is important for the United States to rely on other countries as a source of strength. While relying on other countries would be an answer that would support being part of a league of countries, which is what he's arguing against. So we know A cannot be the answer because it contradicts the point that he is trying to make. Answer choice B, it is necessary that the United States reject its own ideals and think of other world powers. Again, his entire message is very America-centric. He doesn't want them thinking of other world powers. He doesn't want them to reject their own ideals. He wants them to stay strong to their ideals of freedom, to not be shackled down by another country. Answer choice C. It is vital for the United States to first think of what is best for the world and aid other countries. Well, that is actually the direct opposite of the argument he makes. You might think it is true, and he does talk about doing what is best for the world, but he only talks about doing what is best for the world in terms of helping the United States first, of not focusing on the small problems of other countries, but instead focusing on taking care of America and America's problems in order to best help the world. So answer choice D is very definitely correct here. Question 10 reads, Part A, what is the overall tone of Senator Lodge's speech? The correct answer here is A, patriotic. We know it's very patriotic because he continually makes appeals to what America is, about staying loyal to America's flag, about staying loyal to America's ideals about freedom, about protecting America and looking after America first. These are all very patriotic ideals. So this passage has a very strong patriotic message. If you are a patriot, you too will worry about America first rather than this mongrel League of Nations. Traitorous would be the opposite of it. He is not betraying America. He is worried about protecting America, about protecting his country. Nostalgic, a wistful longing for the past. He's not really longing for the past when he describes that they need to stay strong and continue doing what they've been doing. He's not saying, oh, I miss the good old days when America was America. He's saying, no, we need to continue doing what we've been doing. So it's not that he misses the past, it's that he wants to continue doing what they've been doing in the past. So nostalgic doesn't quite fit. And then disdainful, where he's looking down on something and being very critical of it. You could say that he is disdainful of the League of Nations, and he certainly is in parts. He does look down on the League of Nations and thinks it is not advantageous. When he describes it as a mongrel banner, he is being disdainful. However, it's asking you about the overall tone. All right, and the overall tone here is in defense of America, remaining loyal to America is the overall message and the overall tone. So patriotic is the stronger answer because it's more prevalent. It's more present throughout the entirety of the passage than disdainful is. So disdainful is present, but only in certain sections rather than throughout the entire text, as patriotic is. Question 11 requires you to have gotten question number 10 correct. So part B, which quote best illustrates Senator Lodge's tone in his speech. So you would have had to have correctly identified the tone as patriotic in order to identify the patriotic quote that shows his patriotism. I have loved but one flag, and I cannot share that devotion with another flag. So he is loyal only to one flag, to the flag of the U.S., and no other flag. He cannot share that devotion. So answer choice C shows that his loyalty is to the United States alone, which is a very patriotic kind of belief. Answer choice A, we have made mistakes, we have had shortcomings. Admitting that the United States has made mistakes isn't particularly patriotic, showing loyalty specifically to his country. That's saying, hey, my country done messed up at some point. It is not a patriotic sentiment to say that your country has made mistakes. Answer choice B, internationalism illustrated by the Bolshevik is to me repulsive. I hate this particular idea. Well, just because he hates internationalism doesn't mean that it's because he is patriotic. So his hatred of internationalism, while connected to his patriotism, does not demonstrate his patriotism. It resulted from his patriotism, but by itself does not prove his patriotism. Answer choice D, we would not have our politics distracted and embittered by the dissensions of other lands. So this is something that he does not want to happen, but it does not in and of itself prove that he is loyal to his country. Not wanting to be distracted and embittered is not necessarily the same as supporting America like above all others and really caring about America the most. So answer choice C best illustrates his patriotic tone because it best conveys the deep and particular love that he has for our country above all others. Question 12 reads, which of the following could Senator Lodge do to improve his argument? So the correct answer here is answer choice A. Arguments need to be founded both on your rhetoric, but also on both on your rhetoric and your evidence. And he currently really lacks evidence that being part of this League of Nations would negatively impact the United States as a country. So offering specific fact-based evidence to support his claims would make his argument stronger. If he could prove that the League of Nations would be detrimental with actual evidence and studies and examples of other countries who have been negatively impacted by similar things in the past, he would have a stronger argument for it. Answer choice B is incorrect. Right from an objective point of view. I understand why you'd be tempted by this, because an objective point of view, like you don't have a side, that seems like a good thing, right? Being neutral. But when you're making an argument by its nature is not neutral. You have to be biased to make an argument. So if you're trying to improve an argument, being neutral is the worst thing you can do. You need to be arguing for your side and be on your side. So no bias to his argument. Well, no, he needs to have a bias. He just needs to back up that bias, that preference for the side that he's actually arguing. Address his letter to a different audience. I don't think the fact that he's addressing his letter to the president is the problem. That seems like a legitimate person to address a strong opinion on a policy decision for the United States, and utilize informal language to build credibility. In a letter about joining the League of Nations as a country, informal language would not build credibility. Your credibility would be built by using more formal language, which he already uses formal language. So he doesn't need to increase the amount of formal language he is using because he is already using all formal language. Question 13 reads, in paragraph 7, Senator Lodge calls the League of Nations a deformed experiment. What effect does this phrase have on his argument? So, without even going back to paragraph 7, we already know from the argument, from the title of this piece, that he is against the League of Nations. So what effect does it have on his argument against the League of Nations if he calls the League of Nations a deformed experiment? Well, Answer choice C is correct. It demonstrates his opposition, right? We know he's against the League from the title, but also from his arguments throughout. And it does so through the use of a negative description. I would say calling something a deformed experiment is a very strongly negative description. So it does demonstrate his opposition through the use of something negative that he says about it. So answer choice C is correct there. Answer choice A, it illustrates his lack of understanding about the treaty's purpose. It doesn't understand his lack of understanding about the treaty's purpose because he's already explained his understanding of the treaty's purpose. Yes, peace is a great ideal. Yes, it seems like a good idea, but we'd be weakening ourselves. So he acknowledges the treaty's purpose, but he argues that it wouldn't work that way, that we'd weaken the United States, and by weakening the United States, do more harm in the long run. So answer choice A is not indicated in the text, and not by that particular example. It exemplifies his repulsion towards the treaty by calling it an experiment. Well, I understand why you might choose this, because the phrase as a whole does exemplify his repulsion. It does give a really strong, good example of how much he despises the treaty by calling it this. However, the second half here is what makes this incorrect, by calling it an experiment. Just calling something an experiment doesn't make it bad. That's scientific. That's clinical. That's not necessarily a bad thing to try something new. What makes it clear that it's bad, that it's negative, that it's wrong, is that use of the word deformed. So if it said by calling it a deformed experiment, or by describing the experiment as deformed, this answer could very well be correct. But just calling something an experiment isn't strongly negative the way that deformed is strongly negative. So I understand why you would want to choose B, because the first half of the explanation is completely valid, but the second half is what makes it wrong. Using experiment there instead of deformed makes this an incorrect answer. Answer choice D, it establishes his objectivity by using neutral language. Well, this language is definitely not neutral. Calling something deformed is about as strongly negative as you can get. And he's definitely not objective, taking neither side, just looking at the facts. He's very clearly biased. He uses several examples of very strong connotative language that's very heavily opposed to the League throughout this speech. So he's definitely not objective, and calling something deformed does not establish that he is objective. Question number 14 reads, which of the following statements would Senator Lodge most likely agree with? Now, this is a question that a great many of you got incorrect, and it really requires you to understand the context of the entire passage and the main idea. So if you didn't listen to the passage explanation for passage 2, you need to go back and do that. It's really important because you guys bombed this question, and this question requires your understanding of the main idea before you're able to make an inference. So it's asking what he would most likely agree with. So what this question is asking you to do, it's asking you to understand, first of all, what is his stance, right, against the League of Nations, against teaming up with the other nations, and based on his stance and why he believes that, which of these would he likely agree with? You have to decide, you have to infer which sounds like something he would back up based on his point of view and his stance. So this is not something that will ever actually be directly in the passage. You won't find one of these statements in the passage telling you he thinks that. You have to figure out, based on logic and what he has argued already, which he would likely agree with. So answer choice B is correct here. The United States is a guiding force in world affairs. This is indicated by the way he keeps saying, look, we need to take care of ourselves first to better help the world, right? The fact that America, he thinks that the world best benefits from America standing strong indicates that he sees the United States as a guiding force that helps the world. We help the world by helping ourselves, is his primary argument, and should place domestic concerns above all others. Now, if you didn't know the meaning of the word domestic, you might have gotten this one wrong, because domestic is the opposite of foreign. Foreign concerns are the international concerns of the world. Domestic concerns are the things at home. So like domestic abuse is abuse in the home between like a spouse or a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. So it has to do with at home. So in the context of nations, when you're talking about domestic affairs, you're talking about your home country's affairs, just in the way that domestic abuse is abuse in the home of like the family. So domestic has to do with home and family. In this case, our home in question is the United States. So basically this answer says that the United States is a leader in world affairs, which is established from his emphasis on the importance of us staying strong to help the country. And it does indicate that we should place domestic concerns above all others, because he says again and again, my loyalty is to the U.S. flag. We need to worry about the United States. United States first. Again and again is his repeated message throughout the passage. So answer choice B is very clearly correct if you understood why he was against the League of Nations, which was that he thinks it will weaken the United States, and that for the United States to help the world, the United States must remain strong. So America first, America first, America first. Again, if you got this one wrong, please, before anything else, make sure you have listened to the reading and explanation of the passage. It is vital that you do so, because if you got this wrong, you probably did not completely understand the main idea of the piece. Answer choice A, the United States rarely, if ever, makes errors in judgment regarding international relations. Well, first of all, the United States, if ever, makes errors in judgment. That's a very strong statement, too strong. And he never says that they rarely make errors in judgment, because he explicitly says, yes, the United States has made errors in judgment before, and probably will again. He very explicitly concedes that the United States has made errors in judgment at the very beginning of the piece. So this is directly contradicted by the text in his initial concession to the opposing side. Yes, we have made mistakes in the past. Answer choice C, it is important for all Americans to divide their allegiance. Well, first of all, anything that talks about all and everyone, that's very strong. That's a very absolute kind of statement. It doesn't say that anywhere. Second of all, that he wouldn't want all Americans to divide their allegiance between America and other nations, because he very explicitly says, America first. I can only be loyal to America's flag. I cannot divide my own loyalties between America and other countries. If he himself is unwilling to divide his own loyalties, he would not logically want all Americans to divide their loyalties away from America, particularly not when his primary message is America first, which it is. Over and over and over again, he emphasizes that throughout the passage. So answer choice C is definitely not correct. It is the opposite of true. Answer choice D, the United States has a responsibility to mediate world affairs. Well, this idea of mediation, I understand why you might choose it, because there is this idea of the United States as a leader helping the world. That is an idea established in the passage. However, he doesn't want the United States in the league because he thinks we'll get caught up with their small and large problems and not be able to take care of ourselves. So he does explicitly at one point say, hey, being part of the league would make us focus on problems that would detract from our well-being as a nation. So mediating world affairs might very well establish peaceful relations, and he does think that the United States is a leader in the country, but he explicitly says that he doesn't want the United States mediating in world affairs because he thinks it will distract our focus from fixing our own problems. So answer choice D is directly contradicted by the text, but I understand why you would want to choose it, because of all of these other answers, it is the most reasonable sounding one. Question 15. Which sentence from the passage identifies how Senator Lodge would feel if the United States refused to join the League of Nations? So right there, like the previous question, this requires you to have a clear understanding of the main idea of the passage so that you can make an inference, come to a conclusion about how an author would feel. So it's not asking you about something that's in the text, it's asking you to come to a conclusion based on the author's beliefs and choose the statement they would most agree with. So it's a two-part task. First, understand the main idea of the text. Second, make an inference. And that's why so many of you struggled with it. This is one of the ones that the most of you got wrong. So which sentence identifies how he would feel if they refused to join the League? Well, first of all, how would he feel? Based on the fact that he's arguing against joining the League, he would probably feel pretty happy. So whatever this quote is, it's going to show this in a positive light if we refuse to join the League of Nations. So answer choice C is correct here. We would have our country strong. He thinks that refusing to be part of the League is what is going to keep our country strong. He is worried that if we become part of the League, we distract our focus, we decrease our ability to solve our own problems, and we hurt the world in the long run by weakening America and by decreasing our focus on freedom and what it is that has made us great. So it is clear that he does think refusing to join the League of Nations would keep the country strong, right? He thinks it is necessary for us to avoid joining it so that the country remains strong and we can fix our own problems. And resisting a peril from the West as she flung back the German menace from the East. This is an example of how we would be able to help the larger world if we stayed strong. If we stay strong as a country, we can help the world by resisting the dangers from the West. We can't do that if we weaken ourselves by joining the League of Nations. So his primary message throughout the entire piece was America needs to worry about America in order to stay strong. America needs to stay strong in order to help the world. And that is demonstrated through this quote, right? It shows America staying strong by remaining separate, and it shows America helping the world by remaining independent and keeping its strength. So answer choice C is very definitely correct. It best demonstrates those two key ideas of the passage of remaining separate in order to take care of America first, and by remaining separate, being able to help the world through America's strength. So answer choice C is correct here. Answer choice A, I have loved but one flag. This is a really key idea of the text, that he is loyal to America first. But him being loyal to the flag and not being able to love the League of Nations isn't how he would feel if we refuse to join the League of Nations. So just say he's going to be loyal to the United States, and he's going to consider the flag a mongrel banner, regardless of whether or not we join the League. He's still going to feel the same way about the League, and he's still going to feel the same way about the United States. So this quote, while it does demonstrate how he feels, it does not demonstrate how he would feel if we refuse to join the League. Answer choice B. Contrast the United States with any country on the face of the earth today and ask yourself whether the situation is not the best to be found. He believes the United States is the best in comparison with all of the other countries, but he's still he feels that way because America is strong and independent. So he felt that way before they refused to join the League. He would still feel this way after refusing to join the League. So this is another example, like answer choice A. This is something that he felt before and that he will still continue to feel after, right? He's still going to continue to be patriotic and feel that America is the best to be found. Answer choice D. Our first ideal is our country, and we see her in the future as in the past, giving service to all the people in the world. So again, he thought in the first place that our first ideal was our country. He's still going to think that afterwards. And he sees her as giving service to all the people in the world. This is something that he thinks we're already doing and that we will continue doing by refusing to join. So what he specifically thinks we will gain from our refusal is remaining strong to resist a peril from the West. That's what he thinks will actually happen as a result of refusing to join the League of Nations. All of these others are things that he believes to be true of the United States that would continue to be true if we refuse to join. Passage 3 is an excerpt from President Wilson's speech in support of the League of Nations. So looking at the title just by itself there, we already have some important clues. If you remember, the paired passage that we just read was also focused on the League of Nations. However, the previous one was against the League of Nations and was directed to the president. Now, this is the president speaking in support of the League of Nations. So clearly, the president has an opposing viewpoint to the passage that we just read and interpreted. So let's go ahead and actually look at what he has to say on the matter. So right here in italics at the very top, we're given some context. Responding to Senator Henry Cabot Lodge and other opponents of the League of Nations, United States President Woodrow Wilson, a leading advocate for the League, gave this speech in its support. The speech was delivered on September 25th, 1919. So right there, we know that this speech is a direct response to the speech that we just analyzed. So it's probably going to take the claims that Senator Henry Cabot Lodge advanced, and he's probably going to provide a rebuttal to those claims. So this is in direct response to the previous objections that we've already analyzed. So looking at paragraph 1, I have perceived more and more that men have been busy creating an absolutely false impression of what the Treaty of Peace and the Covenant of the League of Nations contain and mean. So right away, he starts off by saying that men have created a false impression of what this is. So the president is probably directly disagreeing with Senator Lodge's interpretation of this. Paragraph 2, unless you get the united, concerted purpose and power. And right there you might notice that we have some dots at the end of the previous paragraph and some dots at the beginning of the second. That, in all likelihood, means that there's a section of the text missing, that they've skipped past some of the wordy bits that you don't really need for the purposes of analysis today. So there's a bit of a time gap, in other words. Unless you get the united, concerted purpose and power of the great governments of the world behind this settlement, it will fall down like a house of cards. There is only one power to put behind the liberation of mankind, and that is the power of mankind. It is the power of the united moral forces of the world, and in the covenant of the League of Nations, the moral forces of the world are mobilized for what purpose? So right there, we have a couple of key ideas that are beginning to be developed. He's saying if we aren't all behind this initiative, it will fall down like a house of cards. So that is clearly a negative thing. This won't work without the United States. And he's going to establish why this league is important. If it matters and can't work without the United States. And we start to see him suggesting how important it is when he talks about things like the power of the united moral forces of the world. He's presenting this league in terms of morals, what is right and what is wrong, and what we need to do to be good people, is how he seems to be presenting this issue. For what purpose? And he's going to go on to explain the purpose of coming together in this covenant of the League of Nations. Also, you might see that next to covenant, there's a little number that indicates that you can look down further in the passage for a definition, and it tells you that a covenant is a formal agreement. So the covenant is basically the treaty for the League of Nations that they're discussing. So every time they say covenant, it's just talking about the agreement that's being established. So for what purpose are we going into this agreement? He's about to tell us. Reflect, my fellow citizens, that the membership of this great league is going to include all the great fighting nations of the world as well as the weak ones. So that could be an important detail, because if it's all of the great fighting nations of the world and they're all agreed on peace, well then who would fight each other, right? The great fighting nations of the world are the ones who are at risk of really starting wars. So it's really important that they all agree on the importance of peace. Looking at paragraph 4, and what do they unite for? They enter into a solemn, a serious promise to one another that they will never use their power against one another for aggression. And then we have another number with an indication that we should go further down in the text for more information. Aggression means force or violence, for those of you who might not have been aware of that definition, right? So basically, the countries, the superpowers, are entering into an agreement that they will never act against each other out of aggression, that they never will impair the territorial integrity of their neighbor. While territory has to do with the sections that belong to someone, territorial integrity is the boundaries of their neighbor. They will never interfere with the territory that belongs to their neighbor or try to take away their neighbor's land. That they will never that they never will interfere with the political independence of a neighbor. They'll stay out of the politics of their neighbors. That they will abide by the principle that great populations are entitled to determine their own destiny, and that they will not interfere with that destiny, and that no matter what differences arise amongst them, they will never resort to war without first having done one or other of two things: either submitted the matter of controversy to arbitration, and it tells you what arbitration is at the bottom. So if we scroll down to the bottom, we know that arbitration is using laws in the courts to settle disputes between countries. So they will either, before starting a war, they will either submit the controversy or the disagreement to arbitration to the legal courts, in which they agree to abide by the result without question, or they will submit it to the consideration of the League of Nations, laying before that council all the documents, all the facts, agreeing that the council can publish the documents and facts to the whole world, agreeing that there shall be 6 months allowed for the mature consideration of those facts by the council, and agreeing that at the expiration of the 6 months, even if they are not then ready to accept the advice of the council with regard to the settlement of the dispute, they will still not go to war for another 3 months. So basically, this is saying that all of the superpowers should agree to one of two things. Do not go to war until either the courts have decided the matter that's under debate and they abide by the decision, or they've given 6 months of time for consideration by the League of their problem before they spend another 3 months waiting to go to war. So they have to wait 9 months before they can start a war with somebody. So they still have the power to go to war with somebody if their disagreement can't be resolved, but they have to wait 9 months in order to do so under this agreement, or they have to give their problem to a legal court and let the legal court find a resolution that they then stick to. So they have two different options there. Paragraph 5. The most dangerous thing for a bad cause is to expose it to the opinion of the world. So he's saying by having all of the facts given to the world, it will prevent people from going to war for silly reasons, right? By exposing the facts to the world, there is no question of whether or not their cause is worthy, and it will decrease kind of like stupid reasons for starting something as serious as a war. The most certain way that you can prove that a man is mistaken is by letting all his neighbors know what he thinks, by letting all his neighbors discuss what he thinks, and if he is in the wrong, you will notice that he will stay at home. He will not walk on the street. So if all of the facts are published and somebody is in the wrong, they'll be too embarrassed to go through with any aggression. You will say, is the League an absolute guarantee against war? So now he's addressing the concerns that opponents might have. Paragraph 7. I ask you this. If it is not an absolute insurance against war, do you want no insurance at all? Do you want nothing? Do you want not only no probability that war will not recur, but the probability that it will recur? So he's phrasing opposition to the League in terms of, well, some insurance is better than no insurance, and would you rather it be likely we have another war? Because if we don't do something, it is likely that there will be another war. There is the probability that war will recur, will happen again, occur again. Paragraph 8. The arrangements of justice do not stand of themselves, my fellow citizens. The arrangements of this treaty are just, but they need the support of the combined power of the great nations of the world, and they will have that support. Now that the mists of this great question have cleared away, I believe that men will see the truth eye to eye and face to face. Paragraph 9. There is one thing that the American people always rise to and extend their hand to, and that is the truth of justice and of liberty and of peace. So he is phrasing this League as though it is the truth of justice, liberty, and peace, and that if they but open their eyes, they will understand the importance of doing the thing. So again, we have him making this moral argument in favor of the League. This is the only righteous decision to make that is morally correct. We have accepted that truth and we are going to be led by it. It is going to lead us and through us the world. So again, we do have this similar idea where the president also sees America as this leader leading the rest of the countries, much like Senator Lodge in the previous passage did as well. So this is one point of agreement that these two leaders both seem to have, that America is the guiding force in the world. Out into pastures of quietness and peace, such as the world never dreamed of before. So doing all of this and making this agreement will lead to peace such as has never been known before, is basically the argument that the president has made here. Looking at question 16, this is a question that a majority of students got wrong. What technique does President Wilson most often use in order to introduce and connect ideas for his audience? So how is he introducing and connecting his ideas? What technique does he use? Now, this one is very complicated. So looking at answer choice A, he presents a promise of peace between United Nations by addressing concerns. So he does repeatedly address concerns, and through addressing those concerns, he does promise peace. This entire speech is a response to concerns, right? Because if you remember from the italicized section at the beginning, he is responding to Senator Lodge's concerns about the validity of the agreement with the League. And Senator Lodge thinks that this agreement will weaken the United States. So President Wilson is responding to that concern by saying, no, this is what it will do instead. It will not weaken the United States. Instead, it will, if not guarantee peace, then make it far more likely. So he does repeatedly throughout promise peace. So let's go ahead and look at some of the places where he specifically does promise that this agreement with the other countries, with the League, will lead to peace. So scrolling up, all of the places that I've highlighted in dark purple pink here are places where he either explicitly, directly promises peace, or he implicitly does so. He implies that by joining this league, there will be peace. So right here, he talks about how this agreement is going to include all the great fighting nations of the world. That implies that if we all agree not to fight, that there will be peace. So it doesn't explicitly say that all of the great fighting nations coming together will mean peace, but it implies it very, very strongly. And then in this entire following paragraph, paragraph 4, it goes into what these great fighting nations of the world will promise to each other, things that will help guarantee peace, or at least make it very likely that they will let other countries determine their own destiny, that they will attempt arbitration first, that they will not interfere with the territorial integrity of their neighbors, that they will not use their powers for aggression. These are all different things that would work together in order to help guarantee peace if all of the great fighting nations of the world are part of this agreement. Scrolling down further in paragraph 5, it says that the most certain way you can prove a man is mistaken is by letting all of his neighbors know what he thinks, and that if he is mistaken and his neighbors realize it, afterwards he will stay at home and not walk on the street. This is implying a guarantee of peace, because it's saying if a country is in the wrong and the facts are published and the world thinks they're in the wrong, they're just going to stay home and not go out and start that fight. They're going to be too embarrassed to start that war if the entire world thinks they're in the wrong. So paragraph 5 is another implicit, an implied guarantee of peace. This is one way that this agreement will help ensure that peace is maintained. Paragraph 7, if this agreement is not an absolute insurance against war, do you want no insurance at all? So he's saying, no, this isn't an absolute insurance, but it's better than no insurance at all. This is more likely to give us peace than the alternative. And that's where he transitions into saying, do you want not only no probability that war will not recur, but the probability that it will recur? So he's saying if you don't agree to the League, you are increasing the odds of war. It is actually quite likely that there will be a war if you don't agree with this League of Nations. Paragraph 8 They will have that support. Again, this is another promise. America is going to give the support it needs, so will these other countries. Therefore, there will be peace. It's another implied promise of peace. Paragraph 9 is the first real place that he explicitly promises peace. So the rest of these are really implied, and that's why you guys had so much difficulty with this question, because most of the time when he was promising peace, he was implying that promise rather than directly stating it. So in paragraph 9, it says that we will extend the American hand to the truth of justice and liberty and of peace, and that we will, as a country, lead the world out into pastures of quietness and peace, such as the world never dreamed of before. So in paragraph 9, we see that explicit repetition of the word peace, and this idea that America is going to be leading the way into this peace. So if you look at all those different purple highlighted sections, it should be clear to you that he is promising peace, and he's doing so by addressing the concerns that people have. Maybe that there's not enough support, maybe that it won't actually work, right? When he says, well, it's not an absolute insurance, he is responding to a concern. You're right, it's not absolute, but it's better than nothing. So he responds to people's concerns, and he does so by implying pretty strongly or directly stating that this course of action will greatly increase the odds of peace. Answer choice B is incorrect. He identifies concepts that focus on the negative results of a world without the League of Nations. His focus here in this piece is not on the negative. He focuses continuously on the positives of the League. The League this is what the agreement is. The League will help ensure peace. The League will prevent people from starting war for 9 months. He continually focuses on the positives, not on the negatives. So answer choice B is definitely wrong. Answer choice C, he provides examples of the injustices committed during times of war. Nowhere does he explicitly say anything about what specifically happens during war. He doesn't talk about women being killed or raped. He doesn't talk about soldiers being maimed and dying. So he doesn't talk about the atrocities committed during times of war. Answer choice D, he contrasts a world without the League of Nations with the expectations of a world at peace. This is, I feel, the most tempting incorrect answer to choose, because he does talk about what would happen without the League of Nations. He does say without the League of Nations, the odds of war increase. And he does talk about what it would be like to have this world with peace. So he does discuss both halves of this answer, but this is not what he most often uses. This contrast of what will happen without the League versus what will happen with the League only actually happens in one particular paragraph, and that's paragraph 7, where he does contrast those two side by side. No, it's not an insurance, absolutely, but we will either decrease the probability by having the League, or we will increase the probability of war by not having the League. So paragraph 7, there is a contrast between these two alternatives presented, but this is really the only place in the passage that this happens. So this is not his primary strategy being used, but I understand why you would choose this if you did choose answer D. Question 17 reads, which inference can most clearly be made by the details in paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. So again, we're looking for another best answer. So more than one answer could technically be true, but only one of them will be the strongest. So it's going to be a matter of degree of which is more right or which is more wrong. So let's go ahead and look at paragraph 2 and 3. But first of all, answer choice C is the correct answer. It is the power of humankind to bring peace to the world by joining the covenant of the League of Nations. So joining the League equals peace. This is the power of humankind. So let's go ahead and look at the details in paragraph 2 and paragraph 3 and look for those key words. Power of humankind, peace, joining the League are the key ideas that we want to look for in paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. So looking at paragraph 2, unless you get the united, concerted purpose and power of the great governments of the world, so there we do have this idea of power being established, it will fall down like a house of cards. There is only one power to put behind the liberation of mankind, and that is the power of mankind. So he is expressing this idea that it is the power of mankind, of humanity, that will make things happen. It then goes on to say, right? And in the covenants of the League of Nations, the moral forces of the world are mobilized for what purpose? So it doesn't explicitly say peace in paragraph 2, but it does explicitly introduce this idea that it is the power of humanity to join this league for a purpose, a moral purpose. In paragraph 3, it talks about how the League is going to include all the great fighting nations of the world. So it's implying that the League will lead to peace. So it's not directly stating it, but it is implying pretty strongly that this League, joined with the power of humanity, including all of the great fighting forces, will lead to peace. That is a pretty strong implication here that is later directly stated when he says, right, this league will lead to peace down in paragraph 9. He explicitly states it. But here it is just implied. Now, let's go ahead back to those answer choices real quick and look at some of those other incorrect answers. Answer choice A, the purpose of the Covenant of League of Nations is to bring only the world powers together to keep peace. Well, that particular detail is directly contradicted because at one point he talks about both the strong and the weak nations coming together. So if we go back and look at the actual passage, this is at the very beginning, I believe. Here we go. Here we go. Paragraph 3. It talks about how the League is going to include all the great fighting nations of the world as well as the weak nations of the world. So the passage explicitly says that this covenant is not only for powerful nations, but also for weak nations, that we will all come together with this power of mankind, of humanity, with the goal of peace. So answer choice A is directly contradicted by the text. Answer choice B, the covenant of the League of Nations is like a house of cards. Well, this answer is very tempting because that is a simile that is directly introduced in that paragraph. It does say that it is like a house of cards if the U.S. doesn't join it. If all of the world powers don't join it, it will be like a house of cards. But it's not like a house of cards because the world is a fragile place without morals. It's like a house of cards if the U.S. does not join in the efforts. And we can see that when we go ahead and look at that paragraph. It tells us without the concerted purpose and power of the great governments, it will fall down like a house of cards. So it's not saying that it's because the world is a fragile place without morals. It's not saying there's no morals in the world. In fact, he's making a moral argument that suggests that the world does have morals. He's making an argument based on doing what is right. It's if the governments don't work together, it will be a house of cards. So that answer is not correct. Answer choice D, the covenant of the League of Nations will succeed even with only some of the world powers behind it. Now, this particular answer is another one that is directly contradicted by the text. That section that we just read about how without all of the powerful governments together, it will fall like a house of cards, that directly contradicts this idea. It will not work with only some of the world powers behind it. All of them must be behind it, or it will fall like a house of cards, something very easily knocked over with a breath or a misplaced finger of a hand or something. So that answer choice D is directly contradicted by the text. So A, B, and D are all directly contradicted by the text. A, because it includes the weak nations. B, because it specifically makes a moral argument, and he wouldn't be making a moral argument if he thought the world had no morals. And D, it explicitly says that without all of the world powers behind it, it will fall like a deck of cards. So answer choice C is the only correct answer there. Question 18 reads, what tone does President Wilson establish in his speech, and how does he establish this tone? So this is a two-part question, and one thing that makes this a little easier is that if either half is incorrect, the entire answer is incorrect. So use that to your advantage, because the correct answer here is he develops an authoritative tone, right? A tone of authority. He is speaking as though he is the one in control who knows the answers. So he develops an authoritative tone through the use of hypophora. Now, hypophora I never in a million years would expect 10th graders to know the meaning of that word because I never even encountered it in college level rhetoric classes. So I am not surprised if none of you knew it whatsoever, and that was the correct answer. And that's pretty egregious, but setting that aside for the moment, I'm going to go ahead and define what hypophora is, and I'm going to talk you through using the process of elimination to eliminate the other answers, because in the event that you're given an answer like this where you have no chance of knowing what a word means, process of elimination is your best possible strategy. So hypophora, for those of you who don't know, is where the author asks a question and then goes on to answer it. This isn't the same as a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question, the answer is implied. The author never actually answers their own question. They just ask it for effect. So hypophora is where they ask the question and then answer it themselves. Maybe they don't think it's self-evident enough where they feel the need to give you the answer, to tell you what it means. So hypophora, he's asking questions and then answering them, and his answering of his own questions helps develop an authoritative tone. Now, he does definitely have an authoritative tone. So even if you had no help or no chance of knowing what hypophora was and knowing that that was what contributed to the authoritative tone, you still could have gotten the part about the authoritative tone correct. Looking at the actual passage, I went ahead and highlighted some examples of the hypophora, as well as places that you could identify the authoritative tone, even if you had no idea what hypophora was. So again, hypophora is asking a question and then actually answering it. So throughout, he asks questions such as, for what purpose? And then he goes on to answer what the purpose of the League of Nations was going to be. He asks questions like, what do they unite for? And then he explains what will be accomplished when they unite. He asks, for example, is the League an absolute guarantee against war? He answers, well, no, it's not, but it still improves the odds of preventing one. So he's continually asking questions and then going on to answer them. But if you had no idea what hypophora was, which I'm sure none of you knew what hypophora was, that doesn't help you, unfortunately. So the other way of identifying that this is the correct answer is by identifying that there is an authoritative tone. He speaks with authority, with certainty. So pay attention to the diction, the type of language being used here in this passage. Now, I've gone and I've circled a couple of key phrases here. When he's describing what they unite for, he says things like, they never will, they will abide, they will not, they will still not go to war. These are very certain sounding kinds of phrases. He is phrasing things in a way that they are like certainties. So that is a very authoritative tone being developed in his responses, right? He asks the questions and then he gives the answers with authority. He is the one with all the answers. He knows what will come, what will happen as a result of this, is kind of the implication. So he says things like, you know, if a person is in the wrong, if their cause isn't just, he will stay at home. He will not walk on the street. He will not cause a war, being the implication. We also see this very authoritative tone in paragraphs 8 and 9, where you can see my purple highlighting. They will have that support. He is speaking for America, and he says we are giving that support to the League. The American people always rise to and extend their hand to. We are going to be led by it. It is going to lead us. So he does speak with a great deal of authority throughout this entire speech. So even if you had no chance whatsoever of identifying hypophora because you've never heard the term before in your life, you still had the chance of being able to recognize the authoritative tone in the piece and use that to choose it as the correct answer. Now, the other half of this strategy, other than successfully identify the tone, is successfully eliminate some of the other choices. So let's go ahead and look at some of these other choices that were available in this question. So for answer choice A, he creates a patriotic tone through his use of historical allusions. Well, first of all, an allusion is a reference to something famous or well-known. He really doesn't appear to have allusions. He's not referring to specific historical events. He's not really discussing particular wars, just the fact that there was war and that this will lead to peace and decrease the likelihood of war in general, but he's not talking specifics about history. So the use of historical allusions, if we can eliminate half of the answer, we can eliminate the entire answer. And you should know what an allusion is if you've been learning your literary devices. You should know that. So if you don't know what an allusion is, that it's a reference to something famous or well-known, such as history, such as the Bible, such as literature, then you need to learn that sooner rather than later. Now, as far as patriotic tone, I understand why you might be tempted to choose this answer, because the first passage against the League was very patriotic. I don't support the League because I am American, because I am patriotic, because I support America's flag, because I want America to worry about America. So the first passage did have a very patriotic tone. This passage's tone isn't nearly as patriotic, though. So while there's elements where he says, look, this is what we do as Americans, overall, that is not the primary tone being established. So he spends far more time being authoritative than he does being patriotic. So if you were unable to eliminate allusion, you might be able to at least eliminate the patriotic tone, because that isn't where the focus is in his speech. Answer choice C, he establishes an enthusiastic tone by using metaphorical language. Well, he does seem enthusiastic about the League of Nations, so I wouldn't be surprised if you chose this answer. Is metaphorical language, speaking non-literally, what establishes the fact that he's enthusiastic about the League of Nations, though? Let's go ahead and take a look at the passage. Looking at all of the sections of the passage, there's examples of figurative language where things are non-literal, such as the use of simile, it will fall down like a house of cards. There's also examples where it makes analogies or kind of comparisons where, you know, this League of Nations is going to be like neighbors who are shamed into not speaking up once all of their neighbors agree that they're wrong. So there's kind of some analogy established in this section here. Now, there is some metaphor in paragraph 8. Now that the mists of this great question have cleared away, the mists of the question, everything has become clear. So there is some use of metaphor, and there's some use of figurative language and devices, but overall, that is not the primary device. Like, it's not nearly as frequent as the authoritative tone was, where it was continually like, they will, they will, they will, they won't, they will, this will. It's a very authoritative tone throughout. So while there is figurative language and there is a very limited amount of metaphor in this piece, it is not the primary strategy, and it is not what primarily establishes the tone. But I understand why you would be tempted to choose this answer. Now, as far as the last answer here, answer choice D, conveying an impartial tone by addressing a counter-argument. He does address counter-arguments, but he does not convey an impartial tone. An impartial tone indicates that you're not really on one side or another, you're looking at all things equally. He very clearly has a side and has a stance, and he doesn't spend a whole lot of time addressing a counter-argument. So like in one particular instance, he asks, or he addresses in paragraph 6 a counterclaim by saying, you will say, is the League an absolute guarantee against war? But that's about the only specific objection that he responds to. Most of the time, he is just talking about the benefits of the League without talking about what the opposition is saying. So he does address the fact that men have been creating a false impression of it. He doesn't say what that false impression is, though. So he spends most of his time saying, this is what I actually think the League is. Hey, you do have this objection that it's not a complete guarantee about war. This is why you're wrong. But the vast majority of what is present, if you look at the amounts of his own argumentation versus where he actually mentions the other side's concerns. This is very clearly skewed to one side. This is very clearly not impartial. So answer choice D is not correct here. Question 19 reads, how does the relationship between paragraphs 4 and 5 advance President Wilson's claim? So the first thing we need to do is we need to go actually look at paragraphs 4 and 5 to establish what the relationship between these two paragraphs is. So let's go ahead and scroll up real quick to paragraphs 4 and 5. So looking at 4 and 5, 4 is where it's explaining what is actually happening in the Treaty of the League of Nations. So paragraph 4, he goes through and he explains what happens as a result of entering the League of Nations. So he explicitly says, what do they unite for? They enter into a solemn promise to, and he basically lays out the terms of the promise being made by signing this agreement. So they will never use their power against one another. They will respect the territory of their neighbors. They will not interfere with political independence of neighbors. They will abide by the fact that nations can choose their own destinies. They will not resort to war without first doing one of two things: submitting the controversy to arbitration, during which they listen to what the judge says, or by giving the info to the League of Nations, giving them all of the facts, giving them time to look over those facts, agreeing that even after those 6 months to look over the facts, that they'll still wait another 3 months before they go to war. So basically, they will give the League of Nations all of the facts of the matter before going to war, and then wait at least 9 months before attacking anyone, regardless of what the League of Nations says on the topic. So that's paragraph 4. Now we need to see the connection between paragraph 4 and 5. So 4 establishes what they are agreeing to. Paragraph 5 reads, the most dangerous thing for a bad cause is to expose it to the opinion of the world. Well, when it's talking about exposing a bad cause to the opinion of the world, it's referring back to the last section of the list of agreements, where he talks about how they're going to publish the documents before going to war and give the League of Nations a chance to look everything over. So it's saying if it's a bad cause, it'll be dangerous when it is exposed to the opinion of the world, when the facts are given to the League of Nations. And it's going to explain why that would be dangerous. The most certain way that you can prove a man is mistaken is by letting all his neighbors know what he thinks, right? By publishing the documents for why he wants to go to war. By letting all the neighbors discuss what he thinks, right? By waiting for 6 months and then another 3 months before going to war. And if he is in the wrong, you will notice that he will stay at home. He will not walk on the street. So if he had really bad reasons to want to go to war, he is not going to actually go to war. He will stay at home. He will not walk on the street. So this is explaining why this measure of publishing the facts and then waiting 9 months is going to be effective. If the League of Nations and all of the other countries in the world have 9 months to gossip about what an idiot that other country is being, that other country is going to stay home in shame and not cause a war, is basically what he is arguing here. So paragraph 4 establishes this is what is being agreed to. Paragraph 5 is saying this is why that waiting period and that publishing of facts will be effective. Because men don't like to be shamed by their neighbors. So if they're in the wrong, they won't actually go to war. And if they're in the right, well, then maybe they need to go to war. Is kind of what is being suggested here in paragraphs 4 and paragraphs 5. So going back down to the answer choices, let's look at the answers for this question. So how does the relationship between paragraphs 4 and 5 advance his claim? The correct answer here is that he first explains what the treaty will ask countries to do, right? He very explicitly lays out they will be expected not to infringe on territories. They will be expected to let countries run themselves the way they want. So it lists out what the treaty will ask countries to do, and then afterwards it explains why it will be effective. It will ask countries to wait 9 months before going to war, and that will be effective because of shame in a bad cause, preventing them from starting a war, causing the man to stay home for fear of his neighbors who disapprove of him. Answer choice A is incorrect. Wilson first explains why the treaty is important for the world, and then discusses what the treaty asks the world to do. He does explain why the treaty is important for the world, but that's not in paragraph 4. Paragraph 4 is focused on what the treaty asks the world to do. So the first part here is inaccurate if we're discussing the connection between paragraph 4 and 5. It happens in the text, which is why you'd be tempted to choose it, but not in this place, not in that order. Answer choice B, he first explains the mechanics of the treaty. So I see why you might want to choose that, because the mechanics of the treaty, right, the nuts and bolts of it, so he is talking some specifics about what the treaty will entail. I understand why you might want to choose that first half, but looking at the second half of it, he explains how it will not work. Well, if it's not going to work, he wouldn't want it. So that doesn't make any sense with this passage, because he's arguing in favor of the treaty. He's not going to explain why the treaty won't work if he's in favor of the treaty. So it's not answer choice B. Answer choice D, he explains why the treaty was drafted and then why it was ratified. Well, it hasn't been ratified. They haven't all agreed to it yet, so it definitely can't be that. So anyways, answer choice C is the correct answer, because the first, or rather paragraph 4, gives the details of what is involved, and then paragraph 5 explains why the particular measure of waiting 9 months before starting war and of being required to publish all of the facts before starting war would be effective in preventing war, because of that effect of shame and neighbors. That whole analogy there is where he's explaining why this will be an effective technique. Question 20 reads, what is Wilson's purpose for using a series of rhetorical questions in paragraph 7? So let's go ahead and look at paragraph 7 and what is going on there so that we can better answer this. So paragraph 7, I ask you this. If it is not an absolute insurance against war, talking about League of Nations, so if the League of Nations is not an absolute insurance against war, he is making a concession there, do you want no insurance at all? So he's implying pretty strongly that they are idiots if they don't want any insurance. He's admitting, yes, it's not a guarantee, but would you rather have no insurance? So he's trying to get them to understand how misguided they are if they think that no insurance is a good idea. And then he goes on to elaborate further. Do you want nothing? Well, nobody wants nothing. That's clearly a bad thing with very negative connotations. And then he takes it still further. Do you want not only no probability that war will not happen again, but also the probability that it will recur? You're not just stopping the solution, you're encouraging war again if you're the idiot that thinks we shouldn't have this league, is kind of what he's saying there. So looking at our potential answer choices, what is his purpose using this series of rhetorical questions? Do you want nothing? Do you want to encourage war? With those rhetorical questions, he is helping the audience realize that some guarantee is better than no guarantee, right? Because he explicitly says, do you want nothing? That's no guarantee, which increases the chances of war overall, according to him. And then he says, there's some guarantee. Yeah, it's not perfect, but would you rather have no insurance? There would be some insurance against war with this League of Nations. So answer choice D is correct here. Let's look at the other answers, though. Answer choice A, to probe the audience to think more critically about the League of Nations and its possible faults. Well, his goal here is to get people to agree with the League of Nations, so he's not getting them to think about its faults. That's not what he wants to accomplish. He makes the concession that it's not an absolute guarantee, but that's not his purpose. He's making the concession so that opponents will listen to him, not to get people to doubt the League. He wants the people who doubt the League to start to support it overall. So it's not answer choice A. Answer choice B, to make supporters of the League second guess their own position. Well, that's definitely wrong because he wants the League of Nations. So he doesn't want the supporters of the League to change their mind. He wants the adversaries or the opponents of the League to change their mind. So answer choice B is the opposite of true. Answer choice C, to convince the audience that the League of Nations will not be perfect. Well, he doesn't want to convince the audience it will not be perfect because he admits it's not perfect. He does admit it's not perfect in one of his questions, but that's not his goal. That's not what he wants to convince them of. He wants to convince them that despite it not being perfect, it's still better than nothing. It is still better than the alternative of not having any guarantee against war at all. So answer choice D is very definitely correct because all three of the initial answers directly oppose, right? They weaken his argument. He doesn't want people who could potentially support thinking the League is a bad thing. He's not trying to persuade people it's bad when he's arguing in favor of the League. So answer choice A, B, and C are incorrect. Answer choice D is the answer there. Question 21 reads, for which of these claims does President Wilson provide adequate support? Adequate is probably a key word there. It's not just does he provide support, does he provide enough support? So which of these claims is a primary focus that he really provides evidence of? So answer choice A is correct here. The League of Nations has specific mechanisms, specific parts in it that will discourage war amongst members. And he does provide adequate evidence that it will discourage war because he specifically lays out how it is going to discourage war. Like he spends, it's adequate support because he spends an entire paragraph, 2 paragraphs, in fact, laying out the mechanisms, right? This whole big section here in paragraph 4 is all about the mechanics of how it will function, and then this follow-up paragraph is why it will help work to prevent war in general. So he spends a great deal of time on the specific mechanics of how it will function and how it will help discourage war, not necessarily stop it, but make it less likely. So answer choice A is correct, and it is very firmly supported by those 2 paragraphs. Now let's look at the other answer choices here, because this was a question that a lot of you got wrong. The League of Nations is one of many options. Well, does he present evidence that there are many other options? Because I don't hear him mention any other options. He says, hey, if you're not in the League, you have nothing. That's not a bunch of other options to create both global peace and harmony. So he says that the League of Nations could create global peace and harmony, but he's not talking about it being one of many different potential options. So that little tiny section in the middle there eliminates this answer as a possibility. It is definitely not B. Answer choice C, most world leaders are in support of the League of Nations. It tells us that all of the major world powers would need to support it for it to work, but it never actually tells us which world leaders agree with it or how many world leaders agree with it. That's not something that it ever actually tells us. Answer choice D, only countries led by immoral men are opposed to the treaty. Whoa, that's a very strong statement. You want to be very cautious of anything that's strongly negative. It doesn't talk about the morals of the other countries. It certainly doesn't provide support that the other countries who don't want it are immoral, who are morally wrong, who are against what is right. Like, whoa, that's a very judgmental statement. You want to be really cautious of an answer like that. That is definitely not the answer. So answer choice A is correct because that paragraph lays out in very specific detail the mechanisms, and the following paragraph explains how those mechanisms specifically discourage war. And again, that was back in paragraphs 4 and paragraph 5, where you can really see laying out the mechanisms followed by why he thinks those mechanisms will be effective. Specifically, the one about waiting 9 months and releasing all of the evidence are some of the specific pieces of evidence he gives that it will be effective. Question 22 reads, what might a critic of President Wilson's speech point out in an attempt to discredit his claim? So what would his enemies say about his speech to say that he didn't argue it effectively enough? The correct answer here is C, that he fails to prove that League of Nations members will uphold the agreement. That's true. He never actually talks about what will happen if they don't follow the rules. He says that they're going to sign an agreement to wait 9 months before conducting war, that they will release all the facts, but where does he prove that they're actually going to release the facts? Where does he give a listing of consequences for what will happen if they do go to war before 9 months? There is no actual evidence that they will uphold the agreement or that there will be any kind of consequences if they do not uphold this agreement. Looking at answer choice A, Wilson unfairly attacks critics of the League using inflammatory rhetoric. This particular answer is definitely wrong because the things that he says about critics of the League, he's not attacking them at all. He says they might say this. He makes some concessions to them, but he never says, well, those idiots think this. So he never actually attacks critics of the League, and he doesn't use inflammatory rhetoric. You might be confusing this with the first passage speaking against the League, because Senator Lodge does attack the supporters of the League, and he does use inflammatory language, but Wilson does not, in this piece supporting the League, do that. Answer choice B, he fails to acknowledge and refute the counterclaim in his argument. That's false. He makes a couple of different concessions where he does acknowledge, hey, they do have a point here, but then he goes on and he refutes that point. So, for example, when you're looking at paragraph 6, it says, you will say, well, is it an absolute guarantee against war? That's the counterclaim. He acknowledges it, paragraph 7. Well, it's not an absolute insurance, but would you rather have nothing? So he does present the objections of his opponents and then respond to them. Whether or not he does so adequately is up to you, but that's not the major area of weakness in this particular essay. So it's not that he fails to acknowledge and refute. It's that he doesn't actually prove what he's saying. He doesn't have facts to back up his arguments. He says things like, yeah, the neighbor who's ashamed is just going to stay at home. That's not even a specific anecdote. Like, hey, there was this one time my neighbor Steve. That's a very generalized claim that he provides no evidence for. So he explains the reasoning for why he thinks it's going to work, but he doesn't actually prove that it will work. He doesn't talk the specifics that make it clear it will actually work. Answer choice D, he makes no attempt to include a rebuttal against potential criticism. Well, that's directly contradicted because there's several spots where he does include a rebuttal, where he does address potential criticism. One, that paragraph that I just discussed with you guys, right? That paragraph 6 into paragraph 7, right? This is the criticism that he then goes on and addresses in paragraph 7, but he also does so earlier in the piece as well. So if you go up to the beginning, right, he talks about how men have been creating a false impression of what the treaty is. He responds to that false impression. So there's a couple of places where he addresses the thoughts of others and then responds to them. Question 23, what concept is central to both Wilson and Lodge's speeches? So right away, we've now reached the passage comparison section. So you have to keep straight who is who. So Lodge was the first particular speech. So in Lodge's speech, we have the idea that it is very patriotic, it is very pro-America, that it's the selfish argument that America needs to take care of America in order to be able to help the world. And then on the flip side, you have Wilson's argument, which Wilson's argument is that this League of Nations makes war less likely, and that it's a good thing, and that will lead the world into peace. So he suggests pretty strongly that it will be peace and that it will make war less likely. Forgive my handwriting. The battery in my pen died when I was working on this. So both of these are focused on the idea of peace. So answer choice B is the correct answer here. They're both focused on the role of the United States in securing world peace. Now, Lodge personally believes that it is the United States' job to stay strong so that it can secure world peace. For example, it talks about protecting from the danger from the West of communism. So it thinks the role of the United States is in doing its own thing and remaining independent so that it stays strong, so that it can protect the world. Wilson thinks the role of the United States is in leading all of the nations together forward into peace through the League. So they both have an idea of how the United States will help secure world peace. That idea just happens to be in direct opposition. with the other. So answer choice B is correct. They both have different views on what the role of the United States is in securing world peace, but they both want world peace. Answer choice A is incorrect. The importance of creating global unity. So Wilson is focused on the importance of creating global unity, but Lodge is more focused on America remaining independent. That's kind of the opposite of global unity. He's not worried about America being united with the world. He wants America independent so that they can protect the world. These are different things. Answer choice C, the inability of the United States to establish itself as a world power. Well, both of them seem to think the United States is already a world power. Both of them talk about America being the one leading forward other nations. Lodge thinks America needs to stay strong to protect other nations. Wilson talks explicitly about them leading forward into peace with the other nations following in that very last paragraph of his particular speech. So both of them agree that the United States is already a world power. They don't think that the United States has been unable to be a world power. That is not something that is present in either of their speeches. Answer D is incorrect. It says the volatile nature of the post-war world. So volatile means basically rapidly changing. Neither of them really focus on how quickly the world is changing. That's not something either focus on, but I understand why you would choose this answer. If you didn't know that volatile meant like changing quickly, you might have just picked it because it had a big fancy word. So I understand why you would choose D, but it's not the correct answer. Neither of them focuses on how the world is changing. Question 24 reads, how do the speeches by Senator Lodge and President Wilson address the involvement of the United States in working to achieve world peace? So the correct answer here is answer D. Senator Lodge claims that the United States is the world's best hope for peace. If it remains independent and strong. So this is supported where he says that the United States should remain independent to protect from threats from the West. That was at the end of his initial speech. That was one of the sections we looked at in the passage analysis previously. So if you don't remember that, you might want to go back to the part where I go over that passage. And that is in the minute marks if you need to go back and look at that. And then President Wilson states that all the powerful governments and even the weak must join the League of Nations to achieve peace. So he does say that all of the powerful governments, right, we must all join or it will be like that house of cards that falls down, and even the weak. He does suggest the idea that the weak could join as well, should join together, and he does think that it will lead to peace, or at least an increased likelihood of peace. So answer choice D is definitely correct. It is definitely or it supports both of the messages. The first half accurately describes Senator Lodge's message, and the second half accurately describes President Wilson's stance. So looking at answer choice A, Senator Lodge believes the welfare of mankind depends on the strength of American allies. That's false. He thinks it's the strength of America itself, that America must stand strong. America's flag is what he holds the only loyalty to. So he doesn't want to worry about allies. He wants to worry about America being strong. So answer choice A is incorrect already. President Wilson claims the power of mankind will join together to achieve peace. That's correct. The second half of this is accurate, but the first half is wrong. And if the first half is wrong, the entire answer is wrong. Answer choice B, Senator Lodge urges Americans to be patriotic. Well, he is very patriotic, so accurate so far, fulfilling the words of the League of Nations. Well, that's false, because he's against the League of Nations. If you look at even just the title of the speech and the excerpt they give us, giving us context, it tells us that he's against the League of Nations. His entire piece is arguing against it with very inflammatory language. So if the first half is wrong, the entire answer is wrong. President Wilson asserts Americans can extend a hand to others and lead the world into a peaceful existence. Again, the second half is correct. So I understand why you might want to choose that. If you didn't notice that one little detail making it false, it would be easy to choose this answer. Answer choice C. Senator Lodge believes that if the U.S. meddles in the quarrels of others, it will weaken the United States. That is accurate, right? He's worried that if we get caught up in the League, the United States will be weakened and its service to the world's peace, right? He thinks we protect world peace by being strong, while President Wilson expresses that there is likely a chance that war could occur even if the United States joins the League. Now, of the answers, this one is the best of the secondary incorrect answers, because the second half, President Wilson does express that there is a chance that war could occur even if the United States joins the League. The only word that is incorrect in this entire answer is that word likely. He doesn't suggest that it is likely the League will fail, because if it was likely the League would fail, he wouldn't be supporting the League. He acknowledges that there is a possibility that it could fail, but he's not saying it's a likely possibility. That would be counter to his entire argument. So that one word likely there is what makes this answer incorrect. But of the answers, that was the second best answer. It's only that word likely that makes it wrong, but even a single word being wrong can make the entire answer wrong. Question 25 reads, which explanation most clearly demonstrates the rhetorical strategies used by the speakers to argue their position on American involvement in the League of Nations? So in this case, answer choice B is correct. So looking over it, Senator Lodge uses first-person point of view and inflammatory language, to coerce a nation into supporting his claim. So he does use very inflammatory language. That's something that immediately stands out to me that I recall from the first passage. So he does use those really insulting terms when describing the League. So if we go back and look at his description of the League, he says things, right, it's to me repulsive. That's very strong language there. It is to me repulsive, those who support internationalism. He also says that you endanger America's very existence if you fetter her in the interests and quarrels of other nations. He goes on to describe this League of Nations as a deformed experiment. So he's using very, very insulting language. So that is accurate. And he does use first-person point of view where he says, national I must remain. I have never had, right? Mongrel banner. There's some more insulting language there. So he is very clearly using that first person. I. All right. He uses it consistently. And he also uses that very negative rhetoric, that very inflammatory argumentation, insulting the other side. So the first half of answer choice B is definitely correct. And then the second half, President Wilson uses inclusive language and repetition to logically develop his argument. He does seem more logical. He's not insulting of the opposing side at all. He talks about moving together in the spirit of unity. He talks about countries coming together, even the weak ones. So he does use inclusive language. He does use logic versus insulting. Like at no point does President Wilson insult the opposition the way that Senator Lodge does. So answer choice B is correct on both counts. Looking at answer choice A, Senator Lodge uses flattery. Well, that's false. He uses insults. That's the opposite of true there for that answer. President Wilson uses pathos. That's an emotional appeal to convince Americans they must act to avoid future wars. So if President Wilson were using pathos to avoid war, he would say things like, think of the little children without their fathers, alone and destitute with nobody to provide for them, right? Like a Humane Society commercial with that deep kind of emotional appeal. That's not what he's doing. He's logically saying, like, look, if we do this, countries will be shamed into behaving. This is more likely to increase the odds of us staying at peace. We should do the thing to remain at peace. So it's a very logical argument. It's not a particularly emotional argument. So answer choice A is incorrect on both counts because flattery is flat out wrong and pathos isn't really what President Wilson is using. Answer choice C, Senator Lodge applies positive rhetoric to instill positive change. Well, that's false. He uses really strongly negative language, right? And we already went over that when we looked back up previously. President Wilson speaks of corrective measures to eliminate undesirable conditions. He does talk of corrective measures, right? He says, like, look, if we don't mess with people's territories, if we present all the evidence, this is likely to correct the problem of war. It's not guaranteed to, but it's likely to. He doesn't really go into what the undesirable conditions are other than saying like, hey, we can avoid war, but he doesn't really go into the specifics. But the first half is definitely wrong. And if the first half is wrong, the entire answer is wrong. So it's not C. Answer choice D, Senator Lodge implements parallel structure to strengthen his argument of peace for all nations. Well, first of all, his argument isn't really peace for all nations. Lodge is more focused on saying, hey, United States needs to remain strong to protect the world, but he's not specifically like, go peace, raw peace. So that's not really what he's focused on. President Wilson uses sarcasm to support his claim that peace for America is guaranteed. Well, first of all, President Wilson using sarcasm, that's a little dark and twisty. He has a very positive message, whereas Senator Lodge had a very negative message. So if anybody was using sarcasm, it was Senator Lodge. But President Wilson definitely isn't supporting his claim that peace for America is guaranteed. That word guaranteed is an absolute. It eliminates this entire answer. Just that single word, nothing is guaranteed, and he explicitly says it's not guaranteed. No, there are no guarantees, but it's less likely that we'll have a war. It's at least limited insurance if we have the League of Nations. So answer choice D is definitely not correct because President Wilson never actually guarantees 100%. He explicitly says otherwise. No, it's not a guarantee. He concedes. And he goes on to explain, though, that it does improve the chances of peace. So the only correct answer here is answer B.